This week on the Communicators, a discussion about the popular social media site, Facebook. Our guest is their public policy director, Tim Sparapani.
On your screen is Tim Sparapani, who is the public policy director for Facebook. Mr. Sparapani, if you would start by giving us a snapshot of what Facebook is.
Facebook is one of the fastest growing new communications tools. It's a company that's 6 years old, and our mission is to make the world both more open and more connected. And we do that by providing people a free tool whereby they can share information with anyone, anywhere, at any time. And it's turned into a fabulous success. And so far, we have over 400 million active users worldwide. It's really become a phenomenon.
What countries don't permit Facebook or block Facebook?
So we are oftentimes blocked by China, occasionally Vietnam, or regularly Vietnam. That started in November of last year.
Why?
It's a remarkable question. We're not sure. This is not a company with any political agenda whatsoever. We are a vehicle for communications of our users. So whatever our users feel like talking about with their family, their friends, their business associates, that's what we do. We're the intermediary that allows that communication to take place. So it's unusual that countries would take the step of blocking their own citizens' communications by blocking access to our site.
How many employees and where is it headquartered?
So we're a little bit over 1,200 employees, which is a pretty dramatic growth spurt for us. We still think of ourselves, still act as a startup company. We're based in Palo Alto, California. It's a true Silicon Valley success story. We feel like we're the likely successor to a long-term process in Silicon Valley where innovation has led to really exciting new tools for people to explore the world around them. I think we're the next step, we hope, in that iteration process.
Well, Mr. Sparapani, Facebook just recently opened its Washington office, and you're the public policy director.
I am.
Why does Facebook feel a need to have a presence in Washington?
Well, I think we have the opportunity to have stood on the shoulders of the giants that came before us. Just as I said we were the next step in that Silicon Valley process, I also think we're the next step in the Washington, D.C. process. We saw Microsoft come to Washington really after they had been embroiled in some difficulties based on antitrust complaints with the Department of Justice. They really were not a tremendously established office here until that moment occurred. In fact, there was, to some people's minds, some disdain for Washington from the tech community. Google, I think, learned from Microsoft's experience. Google said, we need to be there before we're in trouble, but it did take Google, I don't know, I think 7 or 8 years into their iteration process before they had a Washington office to begin to communicate what was important to the company to Washington. Facebook, I think, learned from both of those companies. We were here as of our 5th anniversary, actually between our 4th and 5th anniversaries as a company. And I think that we have taken the position that it's important for us to translate Silicon Valley to Washington and Washington back to Silicon Valley. These are not places that oftentimes communicate. And when they communicate, they tend to speak in different languages, almost as if they were English and Mandarin as opposed to tech and Beltway speak. And we stand, I think, as the intermediary here in Washington to help make that communication flow both ways, back and forth. I think the advantage of that is that we're able to help Washington not regulate or legislate without understanding what's important to a small, energetic startup company with really great innovations coming down the pike. I think for the company, we're able to help them understand the nuances about social norms, about long-standing public policy, certainly about the law, and people's feelings about important questions of the day.
Recently, and before we go any further, Cecilia Kong is also joining us. She's a tech reporter for the Washington Post. She writes the Post Tech column, and we should mention that her boss, the chairman of the board of the Washington Post, Donald Graham, is on the board of Facebook. Before we get to Cecilia's questions, recently there was a Senate committee hearing on internet security, and this is what Senator Dick Durbin had to say.
We asked Facebook to come, and they replied by saying, we have no business operations in China, or for that matter, in most of the countries of the world. They went on to say, as a young startup, Our resources and influence are limited. We do not have the resources to devote to G&I membership. But here are the facts. Facebook has over 400 million users, which makes it the second most viewed website in the world. About 70% of Facebook users are outside the United States. Facebook has over 1,000 employees, hundreds of millions of dollars in annual revenues, and is worth billions of dollars. That is hardly a mom-and-pop operation that can't afford to be part of G&I. And Facebook acknowledges that it engages in censorship. In their letter to me, Facebook said, and I quote, "When content shared from a particular jurisdiction violates that jurisdiction's local laws or customs, Facebook may take down that content."
So there's a lot to respond to by Senator Durbin, and I appreciate you giving us the opportunity to do so. A couple of important points. Facebook does not have any business operations in China. And by that I mean we don't have any data stored in China. We don't have any servers in China. We don't have any staff in China. We don't sell ads in China. We don't consider ourselves to be people who are doing business in China. And I think that by any definition, that would pass muster. And the invitation from Senator Durbin's staff made clear to us that this was going to be a large, if not the dominant point of conversation for that hearing. Now, this is to the second point. Senator Durbin talked about us avoiding so far participating in an entity called the Global Network Initiative. Now, this is an idea which, for your viewers who may not be familiar with the idea, is a public-private partnership between human rights organizations and companies. So far, there are only 3, maybe 4 companies now that have joined the G&I. They are without an executive director. They have never had an executive director. They have never had staff. And so far, what it is a set of principles on paper designed to help companies navigate these very difficult moments when countries around the world decide to block access to certain technologies for their own citizens. Facebook has so far decided that where it needs to put its energy is talking directly to the U.S. government rather than to other companies about how to help a company like ours open new markets. We desperately want people around the world to be able to use our communications tool. Again, it's free. That's by intention. We desperately want people to be able to talk to their family and friends about whatever topic, whenever, and however. We are, however, skeptical of the notion that a group of companies, however well-intentioned, and human rights advocates on their own, without a staff, without an executive director, can actually influence the government of China, or of Vietnam, or of Indonesia, or of Turkey, when those countries decide to put in place barriers to prevent the free flow of communications and ideas. We believe it is the Obama administration's important role to stand in the shoes of the great companies that are coming from the United States to open new markets and allow people to communicate. And so we have asked again and again and again for the Senate to act, for the Obama administration to act, for the prior administration to act, and we are hopeful that with their participation and involvement, we can, in fact, open up these new markets. We think that's the most profitable place for Facebook to put its energies. Again, you talked about how new our public policy office is. I am one of 3 people, and I can't be, unfortunately, flying all around the world to open these markets on my own. So I've got to do it from my seat here in Washington. I think that's really sort of the first 2 important points. If I could respond to Senator Durbin's third point. Again, we welcome his leadership on this. His staff has been fantastic. They've been open. They've met with us many times to talk about these issues for the many months before the hearing. But I have to take issue with his statement that Facebook censors. We do not. We have never censored. Quite to the contrary. We don't do anything like what Google has been talking about, has been mentioned in the news about Google over the last several months. Google, Microsoft, other companies like that, in order to do business in China, have had to make the decision, a very difficult one, and one I hope we never have to make as a company, that in order to open those markets, they've had to pre-censor information between consumers and citizens who want to communicate. Facebook, in contrast, and referring to the passage of our letter in response to Senator Durbin's inquiries, said quite the opposite. Where there is a law in place that says that certain content is illegal to have online, and where there is a report from one of our users on our Facebook site back to the company that says that you have an infringing content on the site, We then act in accordance with the law of that country, and we take it down. Let me give you a very concrete example of how this works and how it's different from the sort of censoring discussion that I think Senator Durbin mistook our answer to mean. In Germany, in Austria, in several countries in Western Europe, it is illegal to have Nazi propaganda or Nazi discussions online. That's a matter of law. It has been repeated over and over again in statute. It's 30 or 40, 50 years now of history of exactly having that law in place. So when some of our users happen to see content between Austrians or Germans which is about Nazis or pro-Nazi propaganda, and it is reported to us, we act in accordance with German law or Austrian law, and we take down that infringing content. But only after, and this is really important, only after our users who are in country, in Austria and Germany, see other Germans and other Austrians sharing content which is illegal under the laws of those countries. So it's not at all a censorship regime. In fact, it's quite the opposite. We rely on our users to police their own experience on Facebook, quite apart from what other companies have been forced to do, unfortunately, by rogue regimes around the world who've asked them to pre-censor content between folks. So I think Senator Durbin misunderstood the import of our letter. We don't censor, and I hope we never will.
Cecilia Kong.
Well, with 400 million users around the world, certainly your story is a growth story, like you said. Your story is a growth narrative in Washington, abroad. 70% of those users are abroad. And I wonder what you believe your responsibility is, even though you don't have operations in China, even though you don't have many operations abroad. 1,200 employees is not small anymore. 400 million users is bigger than the population of the United States and Canada combined.
Right.
So what do you believe your responsibility is in this debate on internet freedom, on how companies should sort of spearhead their own efforts, if there should be some responsibility that Facebook should take?
Well, it's an important question, and I'm not sure that we have a full answer, quite candidly, yet. I do think that we do bear a responsibility. Our responsibility at least begins with the notion that we are going to provide a robust communications tool which is open and free and doesn't make decisions about people's political views, their religious views, their cultural or ethnic biases. We simply allow people to share with people what they want to share and how they want to share it. So that's sort of the beginning of the conversation. I think if you asked all 1,200 odd employees at Facebook, what is our responsibility? I think everybody would have a slightly different answer. And so it's hard to speak about a company position which is still evolving. We do feel a responsibility to allow people to communicate. We feel a responsibility to knock down laws which require censorship as a condition of doing business. Let me give you a really bizarre sort of example which is confronting us right now. One that people here in Washington would find probably pretty shocking. In Australia, a first world country, where we think we have tremendous consistency between the United States and Australia in terms of our social norms, our values, our systems, there's real talk right now from the government in place about putting in a full force censorship regime. We do have business operations in Australia. We've got staff on the ground. We've got servers. Let me contrast that again with our experience right now in China. We are in a vigorous debate right now with the Australian government, along with other technology companies here in the United States, and we're all trying to get the government not to take this step. We think it would put Australia outside of the bounds of modern communications societies. It would erect barriers that would make the internet balkanized, if you will. Erect barriers that truly create walls around countries rather than knocking them down. So if we have a responsibility, it is to help knock down artificial barriers between people around the world, to eradicate barriers between countries and people's communications. And certainly we take that responsibility seriously, enough so that we feel we're going to speak out to the Australian government about these proposals, because we think they're wrong-headed.
Well, can you clarify for me? I guess I'm a little bit confused. I feel like if you were to look at a spectrum, you have Google on the one hand saying we don't agree with censorship in China, so we're threatening to pull out. It should be said that they have not pulled out, and they have not given even a timetable as to whether they are. This is almost 2 months later. And then you have a company like Microsoft saying, listen, we don't like censorship, but if you are in this, we're not going to pull out. You have to play by the rules of the country you're in. This is what Steve Ballmer, the CEO of Microsoft, has said. So I feel like I'm getting a little bit, where do you fit Facebook if there was a spectrum? Are you more towards Google? Are you more towards what Microsoft's saying, or somewhere a mix?
Well, I think right now they're still saying the same things, because if Google has not, in fact, as you've said, taken the step of actually stopping their censoring, to my knowledge. Now, if I could be corrected if I'm wrong. I think Facebook is finding its way. There is no question that Facebook wants to be able to provide its tool everywhere around the world, and that includes China. It's a huge marketplace. We have people already in China who are residents in China who are using our service because they've been able to evade the blocking software that the Chinese government has in place. We're excited about that. Do we want to be in China? Yeah, I think probably, any company would want to be. And I think every major technology company that's come out of Silicon Valley has tried at one point or another. Will we be successful? I'm not sure. I'm not sure what kind of cultural shift it would take from the Chinese in order to make that happen. And I think that's part of the ongoing dialogue. You see from my experience, my example that I've suggested from Australia, that even countries where you think the ground is stable and the social norms and the laws are stable enough to allow free flow of communication, that there can be an erosion of those things. And so I think these are always evolving moments in society, and Facebook hopes in the future to be able to do business in a free and open China where everyone can communicate exactly how much and with whomever they want, whenever they want to.
What, as you expand your office here in Washington, you're going to add 2 more positions, is that right?
Yes.
2 policy positions. What will those people do, and what are the issues that they will be working on? Is this a response to anything that's happening right now in Washington, making sure that you have your message across to legislators and regulators?
Right. So we're very excited to be adding more staff. Trust me, I'm desperately seeking more assistance because we keep getting asked to do things like talk about international expertise. My background is in privacy and free speech. Those are my areas of expertise. But I could spend 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365, doing just those two things for Facebook. And that wouldn't allow us to engage in discussions and debates and inform regulators, legislators about our positions on other issues as they begin to evolve for the company. So we're going to get an administrative person. That person, I think, will help make our office more efficient, I'm hoping. And I'm knocking on wood here. The second person is a more senior position, and the idea is to allow someone to focus on state government actions, in particular state legislation, and also interfacing directly with consumer protection organizations. We really want to hear from various consumer groups about how Facebook is experienced from the consumer side. We've had an ongoing long-term dialogue with a variety of groups, but we need to have someone doing it more formally and more regularly to gather that input. So that person is going to be performing a number of roles. I think this is probably the beginning of a long-term build-out of this office. If you look at Facebook's office relative to any of the other technology companies who have offices here in Washington, we are a tiny fraction of their office. And I don't know the exact numbers, but we've got to be a tenth the size of most of the offices in terms of numbers of staff.
And was it difficult to convince the folks in Palo Alto to beef up your staff? I mean, Apple only has one person here. That's a reflection, I think, of their attitude towards some of the issues here. Their issues here. Google has been expanding quite a bit. Microsoft has a big office now. You beefing up your office, I think you're going to go to 5 now. Is that right? 5
That's
people?
Right.
Was that a hard sell to the folks in California, or is there a recognition that maybe you're being misunderstood, or there are some issues that need more clarification?
Oh, it absolutely was a hard sell, and I'll tell you why. Senator Durbin talked about us being, actually a bigger company. I sort of disagree. We have a desperate need for more engineers in Palo Alto. Everybody who can do the technical things to make Facebook faster, cleaner, better for our users. That's where the energy of a company which feels like a startup, that's where the energies go. And communicating the messages about that company and what the company means are kind of a secondary question. So, in fact, every staff person who's out here in Washington or talking about policy and regulation, is not somebody who's helping to build the backbone of this communications tool. So there is some reticence to put in extra energy into this. And as I said, there's always going to be I think a residual sense in Silicon Valley that Washington doesn't understand how companies are made, how innovation happens. And so we do need more people to help make that communication take place in a more seamless way. But it's a struggle.
This is C-SPAN's Communicators program. Our guest is Tim Sparapani. He is the Public Policy Director for Facebook. Cecilia Kong of the Washington Post is our guest reporter. She's their technology reporter. Just a little bit about Mr. Sparapani. He served as the Senior Legislative Counsel at the American Civil Liberties Union prior to joining Facebook. Now, is your old organization happy with your work at Facebook?
Boy, I don't know. I hope so. It seems like the mission I had at the ACLU is not terribly different from the mission I have now at Facebook. At the ACLU, the goal was to maximize privacy and free speech, primarily for folks here in the United States. Now that we have, at Facebook, 70% of our 400 million users outside of the United States, I feel like I get to do the exact same things, try to maximize privacy and free speech in real time with a communications tool. But I get to do it on a much bigger stage. It's not just the domestic populace here in the United States. It's a worldwide populace. So if anything, I think these two visions are, for the ACLU and Facebook, are remarkably consonant with each other.
Just to go back very quickly to the Australian example, what's the impetus of the Australian government for this censorship?
So there have been a variety of incidents over time. And I think this is not atypical. We see this, here in the United States occasionally. A bad incident happens, a crime occurs, it might have some distant linkage to a new technology tool, and the first unfortunate response of regulators and legislators is to blame the technology tool rather than the individuals involved. In this case, there was a moment when, unfortunately, a memorial site established on Facebook for somebody who was deceased was defaced by hackers. Now, there is no company which is impervious to hacking attacks, to people who want to do despicable things. Facebook, unfortunately, despite really robust security measures, anti-hacking efforts, which we think are industry-leading, was the victim of a short-term attack on this particular individual's site. We're not sure why, we're not sure what motivated it. Well, as soon as we found out about it, we were able to take it down and repair that damage. But, of course, it became an instant news situation in Australia, and I think it generated a lot of negative coverage. And some people, again, took that unfortunate tack that rather than decry the behavior behind the attack, they said, well, the technology tool must be the problem, and therefore we must have pre-censorship of all content on the internet. Now think about that. If we were to do that, we simply would shut down virtually all communications on the internet. We would block what really is the robust nature of the internet, a free flow of information, a lack of barriers to people's communication, and we would impose a really serious one. So this kind of censorship opportunity could be raised here in the United States. In fact, it sometimes is. There will be, unfortunately, some crime in the future where someone may have met someone on Facebook, or there may be some indirect linkage to Facebook. And I guarantee that we'll see the same sort of conversation take place here in the United States. Hopefully our free speech standards will help us all understand that the speech is not what's the problem. It really is the individual's behavior, and that criminal behavior is what should be punished. We hope the Australian government will see this the same way after a period of time in conversation with us.
Cecilia Kong.
I'd love to go back to your experience at the ACLU.
Please.
And maximizing privacy. Last December, you guys changed some of your policy settings, privacy policy settings, if you will. A lot of confusion. Some people reacted very positively, some people not so positively. There was generally a feeling among some privacy advocates that some users' data became exposed more openly on the web. What was the response from consumers, from your users, your 400 million users? I think you had told me at some point that, in fact, a lot of people did change their policy settings, and I wonder what that says to you. Sure. And if you think that you handled that correctly, sort of in retrospect.
I do. As someone who went from the ACLU to Facebook with the goal of increasing people's privacy, I feel like we really had a tremendous success. That privacy transition tool was a first of its kind effort. There's never been a company anywhere that's tried anything like this. We designed a program to make every one of our 400 million users stop and think about privacy at least once and for a period of time before they did anything else on our site. And no company's ever asked their users to do that. Certainly not a company with 400 million customers. As a result, our users, almost 50% of them, now have customized their privacy settings. Now, the industry standard, if you read literature about this, is that, and this is only when companies actually release a little bit of the data, is that somewhere between 4 and 8% of users on a typical customer-facing site will actually go and edit their privacy settings, if there are any. So the fact that we've got 50% of our users to actually stop and say privacy is important to us, I'm going to control my data, and I'm now been given tools by Facebook to do so, I think is something that makes this the greatest corporate privacy effort in history. I don't think there's anything that compares to it. And I think of it as a huge success. So if I could just mention what our customers thought about it. There was a lot of press reporting that suggested at the time that we were going to have a major backlash. I think quite the opposite. I think our consumers have shown that they really embraced the fact that Facebook was being open and candid about how data was being used. It really puts us, I think, in juxtaposition from other companies. And I think our users understood that by being honest with them and then giving them tools to control their data, that we were on their side and we wanted them to have the experience on Facebook that they wanted to have. As a result, we saw almost no drop-off in user activity. In fact, quite the opposite. We've seen an extraordinary spike in people joining the site and people's activity who were already members. So our growth rates haven't diminished at all, and I think we've had a really extraordinary success advancing the ball for personal privacy.
Do you think those 50% of people who change their privacy settings, do they make their data more open, or did they actually retreat and try to hide their data, if you will?
Well, some did both, but the great majority actually set a privacy setting. And by that I mean they went from, say, not putting any setting in place to actually putting a barrier in place, a barrier in place for their data to be shared with other people. So when I read this, as somebody who's been part of the privacy debate for a very long time, I think this says that people understood what was going on, they understood what the choices were, they understood they had tools, and they chose to actually exercise those tools to protect privacy. So I'm actually heartened as a privacy advocate that people moved in the right direction.
And we are just about out of time. Very quickly, Tim Sparapani, why is it necessary, in your view, to have public policy state directors?
I think it's important at the state legislative level to have people who can talk to state legislators for exactly the reasons we've been talking about with Australia. There will be a moment in some state around the country, like my state of Wisconsin, for example, where an unfortunate incident may occur and the first reaction will be, let's regulate the internet. The internet has to be not only a national standard, one unified set of standards, but an international standard. And hopefully the countries around the world will follow the U.S. lead and have an open and honest internet that shares information freely. At the state level, we have to make sure that that open internet starts here at home and that all 50 states are operating under the same rules so that people's communication isn't blocked at the border from Wisconsin to Illinois or Wisconsin to Minnesota. We shouldn't have those kind of rules to enforce certain norms on the rest of the country, particularly when they block people's speech.
Tim Sparapani of Facebook, Cecilia Kong of the Washington Post, thank you both for being on the Communicators.
My pleasure.
Thank you, Peter.
both.